How did Russia transform from the harsh communist reality of the Soviet Union into a playground for the ultra-rich? And how did a group of men, known as the oligarchs, amass unimaginable power in just a few short years? Today, we're diving deep into the rise of Russia's oligarchs, examining the events that paved the way for these billionaires and the complex relationship between wealth, politics, and influence in post-Soviet Russia. Let's go back to the 1990s to uncover the secrets behind their rise to power. The fall of the Soviet Union. The story of the Russian oligarchs begins with the dramatic collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991, an event that not only marked the end of the Cold War, but also paved the way for the rise of a new class of ultra-wealthy elites. For decades, the Soviet Union was governed by a system of central planning, where the state controlled virtually all aspects of economic life, from major industries like oil and gas to the production of consumer goods. While this system was intended to ensure equality and collective welfare, it ultimately led to stagnation, inefficiency, and widespread corruption. By the late 1980s, the Soviet economy was in dire straits, struggling under the weight of bureaucratic mismanagement and unsustainable military spending. In an effort to address these issues, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced a series of reform policies, most notably perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness. Perestroika was aimed at revitalizing the economy by introducing limited market-like reforms, while glasnost was intended to promote greater transparency and freedom of information within society. However, these policies, instead of stabilizing the system, further weakened the Soviet Union's centralized control. The reforms inadvertently exposed the deep-seated inefficiencies of the Soviet economy and fueled public discontent. By 1991, the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse, and after a failed coup attempt by hardline communists, the dissolution of the once mighty superpower became inevitable. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist, leaving its successor state, the Russian Federation, to inherit a nation in chaos. This period of transition was anything but smooth, and the economic, political, and social turmoil that followed shaped the course of modern Russia. Russia's struggle with economic collapse. The newly formed Russian Federation, under its first president Boris Yeltsin, faced an unprecedented economic disaster. With the collapse of the Soviet command economy, inflation spiraled out of control, reaching hyperinflation levels that decimated the value of people's life savings. Millions of Russians who had previously been guaranteed jobs, housing, and basic necessities by the state suddenly found themselves facing unemployment, poverty, and uncertainty. Yeltsin's government, determined to shift Russia towards a capitalist market economy, undertook a series of radical economic reforms. One of the most controversial measures was shock therapy, a set of policies that aimed to rapidly transition from state socialism to a free market economy. These reforms included the liberalization of prices, which led to skyrocketing costs for basic goods, and the privatization of state-owned assets, which was intended to transfer ownership of industries from the government to private individuals. However, the implementation of these policies proved disastrous for the average Russian citizen. As inflation soared, wages stagnated, and the country's industries were on the verge of collapse. Factories that had once operated under the Soviet system struggled to adapt to the new reality, and many were forced to shut down. The sudden exposure to global markets further weakened Russian industries that were ill-prepared to compete internationally. In this chaotic environment, a small group of individuals saw an unprecedented opportunity to amass immense wealth. These individuals, later known as oligarchs, took advantage of the government's poorly managed privatization efforts to acquire vast portions of Russia's valuable natural resources and industries for a fraction of their true value. The rise of the oligarchs, a new class of wealth and power. The key moment in the rise of the oligarchs came with the voucher privatization program, launched in 1992. Under this program, every Russian citizen was given a voucher, a small piece of paper that ostensibly represented a share in the country's collective wealth. These vouchers could be used to buy shares in the newly privatized companies that had once been owned by the state. However, many ordinary Russians, struggling to afford basic necessities, sold their vouchers for cash to more savvy and well-connected individuals. A group of enterprising businessmen, often with connections to former Soviet officials and the black market economy that had thrived under communism, began buying up these vouchers in massive quantities. They acquired control of key industries, particularly in sectors like oil, gas, and metals, at a fraction of their real value. Through complex deals and political maneuvering, they consolidated their holdings, creating vast private empires virtually overnight. These oligarchs wielded not only economic power, but also political influence. Many formed close alliances with Yeltsin's administration, providing financial support in exchange for favorable policies and protection from legal scrutiny. This unholy alliance between wealth and power allowed the oligarchs to entrench themselves in Russian society, shaping the post-Soviet economy in ways that benefited their interests. While the rise of the oligarchs created a new class of ultra-rich individuals, it also deepened the economic inequality that plagued the country. The majority of the Russian population struggled to survive in the harsh economic conditions, while a handful of oligarchs amassed fortunes that rivaled the wealth of entire nations. The aftermath: legacy and continuing influence. By the late 1990s, Russia's oligarchs had become some of the most powerful individuals in the country, amassing vast fortunes through the rapid privatization of state assets following the collapse of the Soviet Union. These business tycoons, who rose to prominence during the chaotic transition from communism to capitalism, were deeply intertwined with Russia's unstable political landscape. They wielded enormous influence, often operating as kingmakers behind the scenes, backing politicians, and controlling vast sectors of the economy, including energy, metals, telecommunications, and media. However, this immense wealth and power came at a cost, as the oligarchs' fortunes were intrinsically linked to Russia's volatile economic environment. The 1998 financial crisis struck the country hard, leading to a severe devaluation of the ruble, a default on domestic debt, and a significant downturn in the economy. While millions of ordinary Russians were plunged into poverty, many oligarchs managed to weather the storm. Their control over key industries, such as oil and natural gas, allowed them to continue profiting despite the broader economic collapse, further cementing their grip on the country's wealth. The ascension of Vladimir Putin to the presidency in 2000 marked a turning point in the relationship between the oligarchs and the Russian state. Unlike his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, who had relied on the oligarchs for political and financial support, Putin made it clear that their unchecked influence would no longer be tolerated. He set out to reassert state control over Russia's key economic sectors, particularly energy, and limit the political power of the oligarch class.